The HTC One A9 has the privilege of being one of the first smartphones to arrive running Android Marshmallow, but it's not quite the first. That honor goes to the Nexus 5X and Nexus 6P. As well as running the same software, the Nexus 5X and HTC One A9 also have a number of other similarities, from fingerprint scanners to screen resolution, but there's a lot that's different too. To help you get your head around what's similar and what's not, we've put the two phones head-to-head across all the key categories. Hands-on reviews, HTC One A9 Nexus 5X. Design. The HTC One A9 has a slim 7.26mm thick metal unibody, giving it high-end appeal. The bezels above and below the screen are on the large side, but with one housing a fingerprint scanner that's understandable. One A9. The Nexus 5X looks less premium, thanks to a fairly plain polycarbonate back, but it does at least have a metal frame and it's fairly thin at 7.9mm thick. Nexus 5X. The HTC One A9 arguably looks a bit too much like an iPhone SIXS, but it's bound to turn heads, both because of those similarities and because of how stylish it looks in its own right. The Nexus 5X on the other hand is rather more understated. Display. Both phones have 1080x1920 screens, but the 5.2-inch Nexus 5X is a little bigger than the 5.0-inch HTC One A9. That's not a huge difference but could be enough to push you one way or the other. If you want something compact, the HTC One A9 is a better buy, while for more screen to play with you're better off with the Nexus 5X. The One A9 does have the advantage of using the brighter, more vibrant AMOLED technology though. One A9. It's worth noting though that the Nexus 5X uses Gorilla Glass 3, while the HTC One A9 uses the newer and stronger Gorilla Glass 4. Power and performance. The Nexus 5X has 2GB of RAM and a high-end hexa-core Snapdragon 808 chip under the hood. That processor has 4 cores clocked at 1.44 GHz and 2 running at 1.82 GHz. The HTC One A9 has an octa-core chip, but it's a slightly slower Snapdragon 617, with 4 cores going at 1.5 GHz and the other 4 at 1.2 GHz. It has either 2GB of 3GB of RAM though, depending on which market you're in. For example, those in the US will get the 2GB, 3GB of RAM One A9, while those in the UK will have to make do with the 16GB, 2GB model. A9. Ultimately these are both pretty powerful smartphones, but both also fall slightly short of flagship specs. There are differences though. The HTC One A9 has a microSD card slot with support for cards of up to 2 TB, while the Nexus 5X has no slot, giving the One A9 a big bonus when it comes to storage potential. Camera. The Nexus 5X has a 12.3MP camera, while the HTC One A9 has a 13MP1, so not a huge difference there, but the A9 benefits from optical image stabilization, to keep your shots steady, while the Nexus 5X trumps it for video as it can record at up to 2160p, compared to just 1080p on the A9. HTC One A9. Round the front, the Nexus 5X has a 5MP snapper and the HTC One A9 has an Ultra Pixel 1, which is a fancy way of saying the pixels are bigger so it can let in more light. Operating system. Both handsets run Android Marshmallow, which is worth highlighting as that's the brand new version of Android and very few phones have it yet. 5X. There are some differences though, as you get the stock version of Android with the Nexus 5X, while the HTC One A9 has HTC Sense on top, which is slick and stylish but not as minimalist as Google's approach. The Nexus 5X is also likely to get prompt updates to new versions of Android, but there's no guarantee the HTC One A9 will. Features. The HTC One A9 and Nexus 5X both have fingerprint scanners, simplifying smartphone security and giving you the tools you need to make use of Android Pay. Nexus 5X. But while the HTC One A9 has a scanner on the front, the Nexus 5X has its scanner on the back. That's not a big deal, but having it in front of you as on the A9 does make it easier to find. Battery. There's a 2700 mAh battery in the Nexus 5X and a Searlier. This year HTC released the HTC One M9, a gorgeous smartphone with a metal unibody. Now the company is back with a new phone dubbed the HTC One A9, and it's still packing strong design language, and is every bit as metal. The name is also similar, but there are a lot of differences between these phones, from the processor, to the camera and beyond. Here's what you need to know. Design. The HTC One A9 has a slim metal shell, with dimensions of 145.75 x 70.8 x 7.26 mm. It's not entirely dissimilar to the metal-clad HTC One M9, and both phones have antenna lines running across the back, but the One M9 is a lot thicker at 144.6 x 69.7 x 9.6 mm. That extra thickness allows the back of the older phone to curve though, so it can sit comfortably in your hand. A9 vs M9. There's more difference round the front, where the HTC One M9 has dual boom sound speakers taking up space above and below the screen. The HTC One A9 doesn't have those, but it does have a fingerprint scanner under the display, while the front of the M9 is a button-free zone. Both phones look distinctly stylish, but with its rounded shape the M9 is to our eyes a little nicer, though also chunkier. Display. On paper there's nothing to choose between the screens on these two phones, as both have a 5.0-inch 1080 x 1920 display. They even have similar levels of protection, with Gorilla Glass 4 keeping them safe from scrapes and scratches. A9 vs M9. We found the screen on the HTC One M9 to generally be pretty good, but sometimes a little dark, and with the Full HD Super AMOLED screen on offer, the One A9 is a much more impressive display. Colors look richer, the contrast ratio is much improved, and, generally, it's a nicer phone to use when watching Netflix, browsing the web, or just looking at pictures you've just taken from the phone. Power and performance. The HTC One A9 has an octa-core Snapdragon 617 processor with 4 cores running at 1.5 GHz and the other 4 at 1.2 GHz. A9 vs M9. The HTC One M9 on the other hand has an octa-core Snapdragon 810 chip, with 4 cores clocked at 2.0 GHz and the remaining 4 at 1.5 GHz. So it should be a little faster than the A9, though both are backed up by 3 GB of RAM. They also both come with a maximum of 32 GB of storage and a microSD card slot, but the HTC One A9 has the edge here as it supports cards of up to 2 TB, while the HTC One M9 tops out at 128 GB. That being said, HTC is splitting its strategy with the internal capacity of the One A9, as well as the RAM. Asia will get both 16 GB and 32 GB variants of the phone, with 2 GB and 3 GB of RAM respectively, but the UK will only get the former, with the US being stuck with the higher spec model. Camera. There's a 13MP snapper on the back of the HTC One A9, complete with optical image stabilization and support for filming video in 1080p. The HTC One M9 doesn't have optical image stabilization, but it ups the megapixels to 20.7 MP and the video resolution to 2160p. A9. The M9's camera is highly competent, but not quite a rival for the best out there. As the HTC One A9 isn't quite a flagship, we wouldn't expect its camera to be among the best either, but it does offer a decent performance in our early testing, bringing it alongside the impressive latest slew of Motorola phones, for instance. Round the front, both phones have ultra-pixel snappers adept at capturing lots of light, so you should be able to take decent shots even in dim environments. Operating system. Both the HTC One M9 and the HTC One A9 run Android overlaid with HTC Sense, but the A9 ships with Android Marshmallow, while the M9 currently runs Android Lollipop, which is the previous version of the OS. A9. An update to Marshmallow is expected for the M9, but until that arrives, the HTC One A9 has the edge, with full permission control for apps, improvements to Google Now and more besides. The HTC One A9 has a more simplified UI as well, taking a lot more cues from Android's stock interface and shedding a lot of the HTC-created apps in favor of the stock Google. Oh, the OnePlus 2 is a great phone, with a beautiful screen and a brilliantly low price, but there are plenty of things that could have been done better, or at all. With that in mind, we've got a wish list of things that we'd like to see next time around in the OnePlus 3. Of course, we don't know much about the OnePlus 3 yet. There is at least one more OnePlus phone due in 2015, which we now know will be the OnePlus X. It was formerly rumored as the OnePlus Mini, but this phone won't be a true successor to the OnePlus 2. So whenever we do get the OnePlus 3, here's what we want to see. Read our hands-on OnePlus 2 review. 1. NFC. NFC is perhaps the single biggest omission from the OnePlus 2. It apparently wasn't included because it's not a popular feature, but that doesn't change the fact that almost every other flagship and plenty of lower-end phones offer it, not to mention the OnePlus One. It may also soon get a lot more popular, with Android Pay now launching, so it's a feature that we really hope is reinstated for the OnePlus 3. 2. Fast charging. Quick charging is another thing the OnePlus 2 lacks. It's a little more forgivable than the absence of NFC, since it's a feature that's only quite recently been implemented into phones, but it's also a very useful feature, allowing you to juice up your handset in no time flat. The OnePlus 2 has a pretty big battery, but once it runs down you could be out of action for a while, so hopefully the OnePlus 3 won't lack it. 3. A better fingerprint scanner. Fingerprint. When it works, the OnePlus 2's fingerprint scanner is pretty good, but we found it inconsistent. Sometimes it would be less responsive or fail altogether, and you can't currently use it to pay for things or log into apps. Some of those things may be fixed with a software update, but we hope the scanner on the OnePlus 3 works well from day one. 4. Cool running. The Snapdragon 810 at the heart of the OnePlus 2 has had its share of problems in other devices, with various reports of overheating. Supposedly the OnePlus 2 uses an improved version, yet it doesn't seem immune to heating up. If the OnePlus 3 can avoid even getting a little toasty, that would certainly be appreciated. 5. A QHD screen. OnePlus 2. The OnePlus 2 has a 5.5-inch 1080x1920 display, and while it's fairly sharp, it could definitely benefit from the extra pixels of a QHD screen, especially as it's on the large side. Hopefully the OnePlus 3 won't get any bigger. It makes more sense as a smartphone than a phablet, but it could certainly afford to pack in a few more pixels. 6. Long battery life. There's a 3,300 mAh juice pack in the OnePlus 2. That's pretty sizable, but then it's also a pretty sizable phone. In practice you should get through a day on a single charge even if you push it pretty hard, but you're going to want to plug it in at night. Whether through a bigger battery, a more efficient screen and processor, or full-featured power-saving modes, there's a lot that can be improved.